Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to another tier list video. As I mentioned in my video yesterday, we will be doing some more Helldivers stuff. I guess we will be doing Helldivers stuff, as I believe I only covered it in one video before. That's actually going to get a sequel relatively soon, because I wanted to expand on the idea. But we're going over everything in Helldivers Mobilize, which is the effectively the generic progression system for the game. That is free to everyone who gets it, and just comes unlocked automatically. So I wanted to go through and sort of explain what my thoughts are on everything, from the armor to the boosters, which are not here for some reason. Give me a minute. Alright, we are back. I got the boosters from Helldivers Mobilize, so now we've got everything major. I did leave out like the player cards, and obviously I left out the ever-present super credits, stuff like that aren't necessarily gameplay related. But I left in all the armors, the capes, the emotes, the what's it called? Victory poses, and of course the weapons, which are the main event. But I did want to include the other ones just because I wanted to talk about their armor passives and their benefits over your standard armor. So first up, we have the Liberator Penetrator, which is unlocked a few pages in, and what this is a penetrator that drops one of its spare mags and drops its damage, which sounds very bad. But since it gains medium armor penetrating, interestingly enough, against lightly armored enemies, it actually does more damage against them compared to the regular Liberator. And also, it can, of course, deal damage to medium armored enemies. Things like Devastators, Warriors come to mind as well on the bug front. And it's quite a well-liked weapon, and I don't have much to say against it. Personally, I prefer, the Diligence Counter Sniper, but I think the Liberator Penetrator is a fantastic weapon. It's just one that I don't use very often, mainly because I have other Warbonds by now, though I did use it semi-frequently on the bot front before I unlocked some of my later weapons. So I'm going to give this an A tier, just because it's always solid. It's a side grade to the Liberator that's better against certain targets, but worse against others. Next up, we have the LAS-5 Scythe. This was a weapon I used quite a lot early on in my career when I unlocked it. The LAS-5 Scythe is, of course, a continuous beam laser weapon that does light armor penetrating and can set enemies on fire. The main thing I use the LAS-5, though, for is cutting through bug limbs. It's very, very easy to just slice the limbs off of a warrior and then render it effectively useless with the LAS-5, just because it's so precise, being a beam weapon. Though I've never really used it on the bot front because I just find it's not something that would have much use on the bot front. For my playstyle, of course. I'm sure that for up close and personal, if you want a precision weapon, this is probably one of your best bets. Though I'm going to give it probably a B tier overall, as I really only used it against the bugs for a while, and even then I've sort of moved on from using it. Next up, we have the Redeemer, which is a secondary pistol that fires insanely fast. It's effectively a pocket Uzi. And me personally, I'm going to put this in S tier. Just looking at Helldivers Mobilize in a vacuum, so you just have Helldivers Mobilize and then the standard weapons you get for free. The Constitution, the Liberator, the couple of Killzone weapons, and the Constitution. This is your only other secondary aside from the Peacemaker, and the Redeemer is just so much better in every way. As soon as I unlocked the Redeemer, I haven't used the Peacemaker since, and I think I unlocked the Redeemer on day 2. So I haven't used the Peacemaker in a long time. It excels as a secondary weapon. It's only light armor penetrating, but it's so quick and easy to handle. In a pinch, you can whip it out and just hose whatever's in front of you down, assuming it's not like a Hulk, in which case you're probably dead regardless of what your secondary is. If you're facing something like excessive berserkers or lots of medium to small bugs, this thing can do the job just to get you out of a pinch. And when carrying things like the super solid state drive, or whatever SSSD stands for, it's just useful as a secondary. It's full auto. You can switch it to semi if you're in a less pressureful situation, but generally it's just a really solid secondary in my opinion, and easily the best vanilla secondary, excluding of course things like the Senator, the plasma pistol, or the grenade pistol, which come from the premium Warbonds, which we're not comparing these two because, again, this is mainly free, though I will make comparisons where appropriate, and one of them is here. We have the Plasma Scorcher, which is the final weapon unlock in Helldivers Mobilize, and it's a really solid weapon. It fires these projectiles that are light armor penetrating, though their explosion does medium armor damage. and it has a relatively low ammo capacity with just a few magazines, but it's very effective. It's one of the most general weapons in the game, and while I generally don't use the plasma weapons, I just prefer ballistic weapons, there's no denying how effective it is. It's great against crowds, it's great against single targets, and the only place it really suffers in my mind is precision, because it's a relatively slow-moving projectile. You can't really use it at extensively long ranges to any sort of great efficiency unless you're shooting something enormous that it won't be effective against, like a Factory Strider or Bile Titan. But overall, I would be lying if I put this... Hold on, I'm having some technical issues with my pop filter. There we go, had to fix that, and now my dog's freaking out outside, and I don't know why. Hopefully you can't hear that. Anyways, I would be out of my mind if I put this any lower than S tier. It's one of the best primaries in the game. I will put it above the Redeemer, though these aren't necessarily tiered. It's just, it wouldn't feel right to leave it like that. The Scorcher, though, fantastic weapon, and one of the best weapons in the Warbond, to be certain. Next up, we do have my personal favorite weapon from this Warbond, the Diligence Counter Sniper. This is a very high damage, medium armor penetrating sniper rifle. Though don't let that dissuade you from using it in close quarters, because it's so high damage it can drop most medium to small targets in just one shot. And it's not even that inaccurate when you spray, so on a pinch it really isn't that bad. Before I unlocked my premium Warbonds, I pretty much exclusively used this thing just because it's so good and plays to my playstyle very well. Of course, there's many different ways to dispense Liberty. Me personally, I prefer extreme ranges with a jump pack, jumping around in scout armor. So, the Counter Sniper, unsurprisingly, goes really well with that playstyle. And I think anyone would admit that the Counter Sniper is a fantastic weapon. And just does great work. It's medium armor penetrating, high damage, decent magazine size, reload's not too bad, and its scope makes it very precise. Definitely an S tier weapon. On the other hand, we have the Diligence Marksman Rifle, I believe this is called, which is a less powerful, but more close quarters version of the Counter Sniper. And in my opinion, this weapon is completely pointless. I remember using it when I got it and being very underwhelmed. It doesn't have the same damage, doesn't have the same output. It's not as it's just not as good. It's just a worse Diligence Counter Sniper, and I have not found myself using it as soon as the new toy syndrome wore off after one deployment. It's overall, I think, just kind of an aimless weapon that doesn't do very much. I'm going to give it a C tier. I'm sure there are people who quite like it, but anytime I'm using it, I'm just wondering why wouldn't I use the Counter Sniper? For 5 less rounds, I get significantly more damage and armor penetration. Next, we have the SG-225 Breaker, which is an auto shotgun, magazine-fed, of course. And this is a pretty solid horde weapon. It's not going to be blowing up hulks or anything like that, though I suppose if you got the jump on them from behind, you definitely could. But the Breaker, it's a very well-liked weapon, and I know why. It's very fun to use. It's very effective against small bots. It's not necessarily super effective, but it deals with Devastators just fine, and their variants. Of course, being a sniper, or being a shotgun, it's not super precise, but it is, just in general, a very solid weapon. It's not too general, it's not too specific, but it definitely is in its niche of dealing with large groups of small enemies, which can sometimes be the deadliest thing in the game. Hold on, I'm about to sneeze. The sneeze seems to have passed. I thought I was going to. So the Breaker, as I was saying, a solid enough weapon, very fun to use. Though I don't find myself using it very often. That may be because I mainly fight bots. I just prefer fighting them to any of the other enemies. But I know that my friend who uses it quite enjoys it, and it's overall a very solid weapon. I will give it an A tier. Next up, we have the Breaker Spray and Pray, which, similar to the Counter Sniper and the Diligence, this just feels like a worse version of the Breaker in my mind. I know it excels at blowing up little green bugs. Can't remember their names. But it just feels so specific that unless you are running it with something like a Senator from the Premium Warbonds, this thing is just, it may as well not exist against anything above the lightest armored of enemies. I guess blowing things like rocket platoon bots out of the sky it could be useful for. But I'd still rather take the Breaker, just the regular Breaker. I'm sure there is something that I'm not thinking of with the Spray and Pray, but in my mind, it's just not a very good weapon. It's too specific. Though I suppose if you're bringing, again, if you're going down the premium warband route, something like a senator or even a stratum, if you wanted to use a stratagem weapon like a heavy machine gun, even then that's slightly redundant. I mean something like the commando, recoilless rifle, spear. I suppose this thing would make a good complement to that, though I would still bring something like the verdict or the senator. But if you're just running vanilla Helldivers gear, would not really recommend running this weapon. Next up, we have the, Redeemer? No, that's the machine pistol's name. This is the first shotgun you unlock. In fact, it's the first weapon you can unlock, excluding, again, kill zone stuff and things like that. But it's a, 16-round shotgun with the highest damage of any shotgun in the game. I do know that. Extremely high, because it's just so... It's got the highest damage in the game, not in the game, in the shotgun category. The highest stagger of the shotguns, if I'm not mistaken. I think there may be a concussive shotgun, let me take that back. But overall, I think it's a very solid weapon. Even though it is only medium or light penetrating, it can be very effective against things like Devastators because it can keep them just stun locked, which is great. This is the Punisher. Sorry, I was just couldn't remember its name for a moment. Yes, the SG Punisher. And it's definitely a really solid shotgun. If you like to play up close and personal, it's a great option. Of course, it's not as rapid as the Breaker, but it trades it off for higher damage and obviously better ammo economy, being round reload. I'm probably going to put it next to the Breaker, as they feel like two sides of the same coin. You trade off damage for fire rate and less ammo efficiency for more damage but less fire rate and higher stagger. Its stagger really is impressive. It can stop a lot of enemies dead in their tracks. Next, we have the SG-8S Slugger. The Slugger is a slug shotgun version of the SG-8. It fires one medium penetrating, high damage round. And personally, I don't see a purpose for this weapon. If you unlocked it earlier in the Warbond, I think it would be better, but I believe this is the second to last weapon you unlock, or third to last. And the Breaker is, or the Slugger, is just, in my mind, kind of pointless. It's a precision weapon at a shotgun's range, pretty much. It does do a lot of damage, and it has an interesting property of being able to blow through multiple targets, small, squishy ones at that. But I feel like if I want to use a precision one-shot weapon, I'm just going to use the counter sniper Diligence. But it's not terrible from what I've used. I just prefer other weapons. I'll say it has... If I was going to use the Diligence or the Slugger, I'd probably use the Slugger. Just because, again, medium armor penetration and higher damage. Next up, we have the, the SMG-3 Defender. So this is an interesting weapon. It has higher damage than the Liberator, but a lower fire rate. Similar magazine size. Still light armor pen, so not going to be taking down hulks. But the main benefit of this is it's super easy to control because of its low recoil, and it's one-handed. So if you're carrying, again, the super solid state drive, you can still fire with your primary, and this thing will, of course, outperform the Redeemer as a full auto weapon. Obviously, higher damage, easier to control, and it is very sort of comforting to have this by your side, just alongside the objective that you'll be carrying around. But I don't find myself using it very often. I just generally find that I prefer something higher powered for my primary, or just something more flexible than the SMG-37, because it's an SMG. It's almost useless at range. It's too inaccurate. Though, of course, up close, it's basically a laser beam of bullets. Slow rate of fire and minimal recoil means it's very easy to keep on target. I'll give it an A tier because it's the only one-handed primary in Helldivers Mobilize, which does give it its own niche. And I will say, that's its own thing. It's up close and personal, so not necessarily to my strengths, but it's one-handed, it does solid damage, it's very easy to control. Can't complain too much. Now we're on to the armors and capes. I will mainly be keeping these together. Some of the capes I'm sure I'll get confused on just because they're not necessarily all in the right order, as you can see, sorted by the website. It's kind of nonsense, but still. I'll keep the helmets and the armor together at the very least. So first up, we have, this is the Advanced Medic Cape. Yes. And personally, I just prefer the regular medic cape, and I'm not a big fan of highly detailed capes like this. So I'm going to give this a D. Not a big fan of the color scheme. A little too Christmassy without enough contrast. Next up, we have the Trench Engineer, and I love this armor. When I unlocked it, I used it exclusively for a very long time, until very recently, where I moved more to being a light armor fan. Engineering Kit is a solid enough ability, gives you 30% reduced recoil on your weaponry, and it allows you to carry more grenades. Very useful if you're bringing the Warbond exclusive, I'll admit, Thermite, but just in general for dealing with larger automaton bases or bug nests. It's invaluable. Having those extra grenades gives you extra chances, so do you whiff or get hit while you're holding a grenade. And overall, I would give it an A tier because I also think it looks really cool. The Trench Engineer armor, just one of my favorites. Next up we have, this is Bone Snapper. And Bone Snapper is pretty cool. It's your standard medic armor, the first medic armor you unlock. It has a successor, but they're statistically the same. It's mainly looks that you're going after. Helmet-wise, I think is totally fine, and it does get the medic look across quite well, though probably not as good as the next one. This might not be the Bone Snapper. Regardless, it's the first medic armor you unlock. Not the biggest fan of the aesthetics, but I can see the appeal. I just think it's sort of outdone by its successor. I'm going to give this a B tier. Speaking of its successor, here we are. This is like Field Surgeon or something like that. I quite like this. It leans more into the Scrubs look of a medic, which I quite like. And its helmet is very cool, and I would say pretty general purpose, unlike some of them, which are a little more specific. I quite like this armor. In terms of medic armor, it's probably my favorite. I just overall quite like it. I'll give it a top of... I'm going to give it a top of B tier. Mainly, I know this isn't exactly apples to oranges, but I'm just putting the gear based mainly on aesthetics, but also armor passive. Truthfully, it should be here. Just for ease of use, we're going to put it here. The armor will be ranked together and will be in order. This is the Trailblazer Cape. Not quite like it. It's very simple. It's very elegant. It's nice and long and rectangular. That's how I like my capes. I don't like the weird shapes. I quite like this cape. I'm putting it in S tier. This is the Hero of the People, which is the final armor you unlock. It is saddled with Democracy Protects, which, again, is a coin flip to not die when you take lethal damage, and you don't bleed when you get hemorrhage. Which is solid enough, though I prefer the armor passives that are more constant rather than a chance that when I get hit by a laser cannon, I won't die. Drip-wise, though, immaculate. I will not deny. That definitely earns it a lot of points. Just armor passive-wise, not the best. I will be putting it... this is carried entirely by the looks of it, of course, just behind the Field Surgeon, or whatever it's called. Next up, we have Hero of the Federation, the sort of midway point of the Warbond. It's a very fancy version of your basic armor. This is quite a popular armor. I've seen it just an insane amount of times, which, fair enough, looks very cool. It's got the gold helmet going on. Again, Democracy Protects is not a passive I particularly like. I just prefer something, again, more consistent that I can always rely on. And while ignoring hemorrhaging from bleeding is nice, everyone can do that with just a stim, and you should really be keeping those stocked up as much as possible anyways. In terms of this armor, though, I think it looks fine, just not a fan of the armor passive, and I don't think I like it as much as the Hero of the People. Next up, we have the Marksman, which is your baseline heavy armor, which you don't actually gain any armor from. You only lose movement compared to the base armor because of the extra padding passive. It means they both have 150 armor rating. It does give you the reduced explosion damage, which you already take half damage from, so you're effectively taking quarter damage from explosions, which will not save you from a direct impact from a rocket, but means you're much less likely to die from the blast. It also makes you much more effective at close quarters, destroying things like tanks, because should you get caught in the blast, you'll take minimal damage. You'll still get ragdolled, don't forget. Looks-wise, I think it's totally fine. This is one of the few games where I'm not a huge heavy armor fanatic, despite that usually being my go-to. But it's just fine, in my opinion. I don't think it does anything great. Don't think it does anything wrong. It's just okay. Not the biggest fan of the helmet. I'll give it a C tier. Next we have Battlemaster, which is just like the cooler version of Marksman. It is sort of, in Helldivers Mobilized, I like to call it the tiers. For example, Marksman is your basic heavy armor, Battlemaster is your advanced heavy armor. Of course, stats-wise, exactly the same. Just looks-wise, this is way cooler. If I'm wearing heavy armor, it's usually this. Of course, this is a very iconic piece of armor, just because it's constantly sitting in your Super Destroyer. You'll see it all the time. I quite like the asymmetrical look. I think it's pretty solid. I will say, not the biggest fan of the helmet, but I think it works quite well. I do wish the armor was the Helldivers black instead of gray. Makes it very hard to combo this helmet or this armor with any other piece of armor. Or rather, either a helmet or a chest plate. Excuse me. I will give this one a high B because I really like the look of it, even though it's heavy armor and I tend not to wear heavy armor. We're on to the grenades. First up, we have the G6, no, not G6, G3 impact grenade, basically. I used this for a little while. Kind of hate the impact grenades, mainly just because it's almost impossible to destroy fabricators and bug holes with it because you need to get them to explode at the right spot. There's no way for them to fall into place. And while it does still do the heavy armor damage, I'd rather just use the default grenade, which I still use to this day and very rarely switch off. I'm going to give this a C tier, just because it feels pointless. I guess if you have a grenade pistol and you just want the emergency damage of an impact grenade, totally fine. Though be careful, this grenade can be very, very temperamental. If you get jump scared by a berserker, by a warrior, whatever it may be, you'll drop this grenade at your feet and instantly die. So just be careful. Next up is this is the smoke grenade, completely pointless. Smoke isn't a bad thing to have on hand, but the smoke screen it creates isn't huge and is really only useful against bots. It can be useful on stealth plays, but you'll need the grenade pistol, which diminishes its usefulness here. And if I really want to use smoke, I would probably just bring the Eagle Smoke Strike because it creates a much bigger smoke screen that allows you to basically traverse through bot encampments completely undetected, or at least extremely hard to hit. Here we have the frag grenade, which I'd also say is for the most pointless. It does the same damage as the default grenade, but it has a larger area in exchange for only doing light armor damage, or maybe medium. Again, rather just take the default grenades. Generally, I use these for destroying bug encampments or bot camps, and this still does that job, but it's less useful in a pinch because the normal grenade you can whip, and with good placement, it can destroy things like shredder tanks very easily. Well, not necessarily easily, but with a bit of finesse, yes you can. I will put it in C tier. Next up, we're on to some capes. So this cape is the Marksman cape, if I'm not mistaken. Not the biggest fan of this one. It's rectangle, which I like for the most part. I know it's slightly curved, but it's just small, and I like longer capes. Yeah, it's just not really for me. Not a big fan of this cape. And the pattern is just kind of whatever. Honestly, it took a long time for me to even switch off the default cape, because the default cape, in my opinion, is still probably the best in the game. This is just whatever. I'm going to give it like a low C, because I don't dislike it, it's just whatever. I do dislike this one. This is actually the Battlemaster's cape, or you unlock them on the same page. They're not technically connected in any way, but I just associate the two. I'm not the biggest fan of the angle. It feels more ornate than anything else. And the swoopy design just doesn't really work for me. I wish it was a little bit straighter. Just not my thing. This cape is fine. It's got a bit of a beveled design on the sides with the intersecting arrows design. It's all right. Again, I would probably just use the default cape, but I'll give it like I'll give it a B, because it's not that far off, just a little fancier. This cape I do quite like. I'm going to give this one a B as well. It's very ornate, and it's the one that goes with this set, and I think it fits quite well. Very fancy, feels very fitting for the last cape you unlock. This is the Technician cape, unsurprisingly, and it's I don't really like it. The sort of sandy, dusty color isn't my favorite. Not a fan of the shape or the patterns going on here. D tier. Speaking of the Technician armor, this armor is very unique It's not the first scout armor you unlock, but it's the only medium armor in the game to have the scout passive. And I was kind of disappointed because I was hoping to get some more scout armors, but scout feels redundant on something you'll be moving very slow in. And its outfit, design-wise, I think is quite solid. It's just kind of forgettable. I don't think of this armor very often. Even though it is technically the most unique armor in the Warbond, it's just kind of red-headed stepchild. You don't think of it very often. And overall, I'll probably give it like a high C tier. Next we have the Trailblazer. I love this armor. It's full scout armor, which means it has the armor rating of 50, but it has movement speed 550 and stamina 125. It just plays to my strengths very well. I love the design. It reminds me a lot of like sort of like scout troopers almost, even though color scheme completely different. Almost like Kashyyyk troopers, I guess, from Star Wars. I quite like it. It just feels very practical, very, very stealthy, and I quite like the greens going on. It's a very nice militaristic look, and the helmet's very cool as well. Next up, we have this is just the Scout, I'm pretty sure is its name. This is the default Scout armor, and most would consider the best Scout armor in the game. It's one of only 4 armors to have it, one of only 3 elites. The main reason people prefer it is the boost to movement speed and stamina isn't huge, and the boost to survivability is very nice, as this has 70 armor instead of the 50 of the Trailblazer. And I'm going to put it in S tier as well. Not only does it look great, its passive is just so good. You know, how could you not? And it looks solid, you know? It looks solid. I just prefer the Trailblazer because I like to go fast. This is the standard medic cape for this set of armor. And I quite like it. It feels very medic-y, like you would look for that red logo if you were a Helldiver and be like, hey, stim me up, or shoot me with your stim pistol. I like it. Engineering cape, hate it. I hate this cape. It's got a really weird arrow shape. The orange and black is a fine color scheme. I just wish it was flat at the bottom and then it would jump massively. Hate this weird design. This is effectively the default cape, but with a yellow stripe at the bottom and an inverted arrow, if you will. Or I guess this would be arrow and engineering would be inverted. But this cape is totally fine. It's very close to the original, so close that I would just use the original because I prefer the length of the original cape. Next, we're on to emotes and victory poses. These are mainly just here for fun before we get on to the boosters. First up, we have Big Whoop. This is, again, the last one you unlock, if I'm not mistaken. Has your guy up on the elevator do a little jump and a punch in the air, very 80s. And it's fine. Not a favorite of mine. It's rather bland. I'll give it a B. This is Clap, and this is the first one you unlock, and it's the lamest. Not a lot of character going on. Your guy just gives a polite little golf clap, or gal, gives a polite little golf clap, and aside from that, it's just very, very plain. Not as fun as some of the others. Unfortunately, most of these emotes have very similar ones. We'll just call them what I want to call them. I'm going to give this one like a high D tier, which means it'll be at the top of D tier for these. This I'm going to call Explosive Handshake. Explosive Handshake, absolutely S tier. You do a cool fist bump and then you pull it back. Very, very cool, very awesome. Finger Guns, S tier victory pose. Your guy does a barrage of finger guns. He's a very cool dude. I love it. Flex, another very solid one. Good for big, beefy armor. Unsurprising, you unlock that alongside Battlemaster. Next we have, I'm going to call this High Five. High Five is not actually a high five. You interlock hands and headbutt, which pretty solid. Not a favorite of mine, but it's a solid one. I'll give it like a B because it's funny. Give your fellow Helldivers brain damage. Hug, absolute S tier. Hug is, the most important emote in the game. You just had a horrible mission. You're out of reinforcements, emergency evac. Everyone's dead except for you. When you get back on that ship, give your fellow Helldivers a hug. They will appreciate it. Do be careful, though. If you steal someone's hug, they will legally be allowed to shoot you in the back of the head with their primary. This did happen to me on an Illuminate mission yesterday. So just be careful. Be careful who you give hugs out to, and make sure the right person gets it, or the other person might get angry. Next we have, what is this? This is the stretch emote, where your guy rolls his shoulders. He's like, I'm just getting started. Pretty cool. Nothing special. I prefer a lot of the other ones. I'll give it a B tier, though, because it looks cool. Next we have rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors is rock, paper, scissors, rock, paper, scissors. You can't explode in this game, so not as funny as TF2. Next we have, this is the Scout Handshake, which is sort of like jellyfish. You go for a handshake and then you start looking around. Kind of a lame one. Not a big fan of this one. I'll give it a D tier. We're going to move on to boosters. First up, we have increased reinforcement budget. This is the last one you unlock, and it's the most expensive thing in the Warbond at 150 metals, so no small. This isn't chump change. And funnily enough, I think it's rather counterintuitive to have this as the last one, as by the time you reach the end of this Warbond, you should be competently skilled at the game, and shouldn't be dying that often. I will say in multiplayer games, it's very important, because there's a good chance you'll be paired with either someone who isn't very bright or someone who likes to throw eagle cluster bombs right behind you as you're trying to run away, and you will probably die. I die a lot more playing multiplayer than I do single player, which might influence why I like to stay so far at range. But this is just a B tier, in my opinion. In the right situations, very good. Everywhere else, mostly forgettable. I prefer things that are more proactive. Next up, we have muscle enhancement. This allows you to bypass the movement reduction of snowstorms, sandstorms, high snow, mud, stuff like that would slow you down. I'm giving it an A tier. Kind of already gave that away. It's very useful, but in my mind, it's a secondary booster to what's up next, stamina enhancement, which I'm giving an absolute S tier. Stamina enhancement is my default booster. Unless someone else already picks it, I will always pick stamina enhancement. With scout armor, you'll feel like you could sprint forever. And then, if you really need to get going, just hit yourself with a stim and you'll be able to sprint across the entire map for the most part. And then mix in a jump pack, whew, you'll be flying. Stamina enhancement's super good. The reason I called muscle enhancement secondary, because if you pair stamina with muscle enhancement, you are impossible to slow down effectively, and you are just so fast. It's my favorite combo in the game. Though one I don't get to use very often, mainly because a lot of people don't use muscle enhancement. But, it is what it is. Next up, we have nuclear radar, I believe is the name of this one. Or no, that's the name of the ship upgrade. It's boosted radar. This is essential in the scout playstyle, or sort of the stealth playstyle, if you will. And it's solid enough. It gives you larger ping radius with the ship module that does the same thing. You'll have humongous pings, allowing you to scout out entire areas very quickly. And it's just generally useful. It's probably a little too high. I'm going to give it a B instead of an A. But I like this one. It's very solid. Next up, we have vitality enhancement, which just means you take less limb and chest damage. Which means you're less likely to die, and you're also less likely to get injured. Very useful. Very, very useful, though, again, not one I ever think of very often. I just prefer other boosters, because I'm trying not to be in the thick of a fight anyways. And with things like stamina enhancement, muscle enhancement, I can get out of a fight without even getting hit. Though it is useful, especially against melee troops. Things like berserkers, if they don't just outright kill you, will often leave you bleeding, which requires you to use a stim. And this could save you on a stim or two, which would be nice. Though, again, with how easy it is to resupply, I wouldn't be too scared to use those. Overall, B tier. And Hellpod space optimization is also getting a B tier. Similar to enhanced reinforcements, it's good, but it's just not exceptional in my mind. Because, in truth, you can get the same effect by dropping in, calling it resupply. You get the same effect without even having to waste your booster slot. But in a multiplayer game, I really love when someone has this, because again, you're more likely to die with more people around, whether again it just be more enemies or getting hit by a 500 kg bomb 3 feet from the Pelican. You will likely die to some effect in multiplayer games. So coming in fully stocked is very nice, and also means that if someone dies on the other side of the map and you just resupplied, they're not boned out of extra stimsy grenades. Very good, but just not my absolute favorite. Anyways, that covers my thoughts on everything in Helldivers Mobilize. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to let me know down below what you think, if I ranked anything too high, too low. Was I wrong about any of the capes? Do you love the engineering cape? Do you love the Hero of the Federation armor? Let me know down below, and I will see you all next time.